Welcome everyone to this fifth meeting of the White Allies Network, which is a service provided by the Deeper Leaders Collective. My name is 𝗔𝗳𝗿𝗺𝗃 and I'm the coordinator for the network. And I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Neil Charlton, one of our Council of Reference, who's going to be helping later on to bring in some facts and figures, and as well as just enriching our conversation, I'm sure. So welcome, whether you've come for the first time or whether this is your nth time with us, you're most welcome, whichever. Just to give you a sense of the agenda for this evening, I'm going to remind us of our purpose and our journey so far as a network. And that usual update of race and racism in the news will take place after that. And then we'll get into our two videos that we're going to show. One from Zeinab Badawi, the Congo and the Scramble for Africa, which is going to show the second half of that, about 45 minutes in all, but the second part is about 22 minutes. So that's what we'll focus on for this session. And then just a very short clip in which 𝗔𝗳𝗿𝗵𝗿, the author, will just give us a 5-minute perspective from himself on the legacy of colonialism in Africa. Before Neil is going to help us with some important legacy facts and figures. And then just before we get into our breakout room discussion, we're going to remind ourselves of some of the ground rules that we set right at the beginning, and then spend a decent chunk of time, about 20 minutes in breakout rooms, discussing the topic and our reflections on the videos that we've seen. Then just to round things off towards next time, what's coming next. And if you can stick around after 9:30, then we will have our usual just open forum, just catching up with each other for about 15-20 minutes at the end of the evening. So that's our agenda. Just a reminder then of our purpose, to become true allies of people of color in the fight against racial injustice, to learn about ourselves as white people, our histories, our privilege and our impact in the world, to learn about people of color, their histories, experiences and perspectives, and to develop ideas for action that we can take individually and collectively towards racial justice. And that's really important. We're going to really be focusing on that at the back end of the year in September. Our next session will be focused very much on that then. And I just want to kind of acknowledge those of you who are people of color that are journeying with us on this. We are just so grateful for your presence. We're so grateful for your just the fact that you're here with us. We recognize that as we talk about these issues, there can be a real triggering of trauma and pain. And so it's costly for you to be with us. And I recognize that. And I just want to say I'm really grateful for that. And I'm grateful particularly for our Council of Reference. And Neil is going to be helping us this evening. Irene, welcome again, Irene. She helped us with a fantastic session last time. I think Roy is due to be joining us. I'm not sure he's with us just yet. And then Professor Robert Beckford, Suzanne Douglas, and Josephine 𝗫𝗫𝗍𝒃cie Riley as well. Really grateful for those of you that you're able to journey with us as we seek to become much better allies. So just a quick recap on what we covered last time, or not just last time, but up to now in our history series. We started by listening to these three people at the top here, 𝗤𝗏𝗏, Afua Hirsch, and David Olusoga, renowned journalists and historians. And so that they kicked us off, and then we spent some time with Satam Samgira, the author of Empire Lands, talking about his experience of growing up in the Midlands in the UK as a child of Punjabi immigrants. And then last time we had that session that Irene helped with on the Opium Wars and looking at their legacy today. And I think a lot of us just were blown away by some of the facts and figures that we learned from that session that we just had no idea about before. So this is the last in our history series for the time being. We have, no doubt we'll come back to that. There's plenty of history that we need to fill in terms of the gaps. But that's as far as we're going for now before we get into our next couple of sessions. And I'll talk about those at the end of the evening. But first of all, race and racism in the news, just to give you a few things that I've noticed, certainly over the last number of months. First of all, the reaction of white journalists to the situation in Ukraine. I don't know whether you heard much of these, but some of the comments were just so painful to hear. Let me just read a couple of them from 𝗤𝗄𝗆𝗵𝗵𝗆, the woman in the red coat there. Quite frankly, these are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine. These are Christians. They're white. They are very similar to people living in Poland, she said. And even Al Jazeera, what's compelling is just looking at them, the way they dress. They're prosperous middle-class people. They're not obviously refugees trying to get away from areas in the Middle East that are still in a big state of war. They're not trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European families that you would live next door to. And other comments like that, I don't know whether you can see any of those on the screen there. You know, we're not talking about Syrians fleeing. And all these kind of comments that seem to be remarkable, that actually white people could be in the same position as black people, because it seems to be far more acceptable for those who with a different color skin to be in this kind of position. And just again, a lot of stuff came to the surface there that just really betrayed, I think, some of the unconscious bias that is in our reporting, but not just in our reporters, in all of us, to be honest with you. And then, of course, there was the reaction at the borders of Ukraine to black people in Ukraine, many of them black students studying in Ukraine, trying to get out, and the fact that white Ukrainians were given priority on the passage out of Ukraine. And then, of course, there was that government reaction to say, you're all welcome, you Ukrainian refugees, you're very welcome. In fact, we'll give any family a substantial amount of money, £350 a month, I believe, support, if you want to support Ukrainian refugee. Now, this is where I have to admit some of my own just naivety came to the fore. I thought, oh, amazing. The government's taking a different attitude to immigration now than it was. Maybe it's become a more popular thing for them to shout about. Then a number of our black friends were not impressed with what was going on there or the government's reaction. And I'll be honest with you, and I'm a bit ashamed of this now. I thought I was a bit churlish to not be as welcoming as I thought. And then I kind of realized just how triggering it is to have the contrast of how the Ukrainians are welcomed. And compared with what we've just heard today, for instance, that so many asylum seekers from Africa and North Africa and the Middle East will be sent to Rwanda rather than being welcomed with open arms, sent there for processing. The contrast of treatment has been so stark for me in this past few months. It's really quite a shock to the system, but also opening my eyes much more to really difference there is in the world. And then there was the royal visit to Jamaica, wasn't there? And the attempt to kind of recreate that Land Rover image of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh without really recognizing that things have moved on. And then there's some of those photo shoots of children behind fences reaching out, which just didn't do the royal family any favors whatsoever. And the growing call in the Caribbean for independence, but also for reparations. There's a growing assertiveness, I think, a growing louder voice from the Caribbean for things to change and to be less tolerant in a sense of the status quo. Then, of course, there's Cressida Dick and in a sense, the shambles of racism and sexism within the Met. And I think we can see that one coming, that she had to go. And then there was Child Q. What can we say about Child Q that isn't so incredibly painful? That this schoolgirl was strip searched within a school without carers being present and in the middle of her period. It's just beggars belief that could have happened. Awful situation. But some good news. Can we finish on some good news? And that is the Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson being the first Black woman to be elected to the Supreme Court in the States. And that, of course, is a position for life. So even if President Trump got back in next time, he could not remove her from that. So that is a little bit of good news in the midst of quite a lot of bad stuff. So those are the things I picked up. Let's move on quickly to our subject for today, which is the partitioning of Africa and its legacy. And we've got these two videos, as I mentioned, the first of 22 minutes and the second of 5 minutes. And we are, as I said, it's the part 2 of one of these history series that the BBC with Zeinab Badawi put together a number of years ago. Now, really good series, 20 parts all in, told by Africans, and that's really important, not just by white historians. It's well worth looking at the first part. We haven't got time to do it this evening, but to learn of characters I'd never heard of before, but incredible women, Queen Nzinga and 𝗤𝗵𝗿𝗺, for instance, in their resistance, and characters like King Leopold II, and I didn't realize that our own Stanley explorer was so helpful to him in his colonial ambitions. The awful treatment of people in colonial times, forced labor, and then this awful story of Belgian soldiers, because they didn't want to use up their bullets, they wanted to save them for their own benefit. They would have to go and prove they've used up some bullets they hadn't used, and they would go and chop children's hands off and take them to their superiors to say, yes, listen, I've used up my bullets, here's the hand of a child that I have killed. And this is an awful picture here of a father looking at the foot and the hand of his 5-year-old daughter who was killed and used in this way. So can't go into much more detail on that now, but worth watching that first half of this whole series. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides now. I'm going to go over to the video and go straight into that. So I said the last 22 minutes, and I'll take you straight into the second video before Neil then shares some thoughts with us. At this point in our session, we watched the 2 videos that you can see illustrated on your screen now. For copyright reasons, we can't include the recordings of those 2 videos embedded in this recorded session. So we suggest you pause this recording now and watch the 2 recordings following the links provided on this YouTube page. This recording will continue with Neil sharing some notable facts about the legacy of partitioning and of Africa's colonial past on Africa today. Okay, Neil, over to you for some notable facts.
Good. Well, good evening again, everyone. So just as a way of connecting the dots, really, and to reiterate what the last video was basically declaring, to just remind us really how colonialism, how the past now affects the present. There is a tendency, maybe not amongst this group, but beyond, outside this group, that these colonial events happened such a long time ago, so why are we always going back? But the point that I would like to raise in the next few slides is just to reiterate the fact that these things that have happened in the past are still in some way, shape or form playing out in the present. And so you can't detach the past from the present. And hopefully some of these slides will just kind of underline that fact. So just a couple of interesting reports that I came across. One was in 2016, a report which was called The New Colonialism, Britain's Scramble for Africans' Energy and Mineral Resources. And in it, there's a quote from that report that says the following: British companies now control Africa's key mineral resources, notably gold, platinum, diamonds, copper, oil, gas, and coal. 101 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange, most of them British, have mining operations in 37 sub-Saharan African countries. They collectively control over 1 trillion worth of Africa's most valuable resources. The UK government has used its power and influence to ensure that British mining companies have access to Africa's raw materials. This was the case during the colonial period and is still the case today. I think that quote just really affirms what I was saying previously, that the history of colonialism and the things that went on in the past, have they really, some argue, should I say, that though certain things have stopped, obviously in the sense of independence of African countries, but some of the economic bondages that some of these countries are in are still effective today. And so this is a clear picture of that, how the British are controlling quite a number of the resources in Africa. Next, in 2009, there was an article written, was referring to the colonial era debts and how they're still persisting today. And the quote from the Global Voices article said that despite this largely symbolic break from the colonial history with France, 14 countries have remained indebted to France since their liberation from them in the 60s. And so these 14 countries that you can see in front of you are still, to this day, still indebted to France. It's not something in the past. This is the present. And the following quote says, "Many recognize that France would not hold the power it does without its dependence on the billions deposited through the system." So all these countries, as you can read from the previous quote, are still having to pay to some degree finances and pay in debts towards France and other countries. And there's an interesting last quote there. It says that former French leader Jacques Chirac once stated that without Africa, France would slide down into the rank of third world power. And so these things are still happening today. Next. In 2021, Dr. Jason Hickel, and I really recommend, if you can, his books and his articles, great exponent on the economic affairs of the world, particularly of the northern and southern hemispheres. And he explains in the following quote something quite strongly. He says the imperial powers finally withdrew most of their flags and armies from the south, that's the global south, in the mid-20th century. But over the following decades, the underlying patterns of the colonial appropriation remained in place and continue to define the global economy. Today, the global north drains from the global south commodities worth 2.2 trillion per year. This is still happening, and if you put them in northern prices, it would come up to 2.2 trillion per year. And for perspective, that amount of money would be enough to end extreme poverty globally 15 times over. Now, I don't know about you, but that's quite a strong statement, and particularly Jason Hickel is very knowledgeable on his issues in regards to the economy, and I thought that was a very powerful statement to make, that the global north is still draining, in a sense, resources from the global south, and obviously Africa being one of the major continents in the south. Next. So this is a quote from 𝗤𝗄𝗎, who was the first Ghanaian president of the independent, when Ghana became independent, second actually African country to become independent from their colonial powers. And he said the essence of neo-colonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. And so he was making the firm statement that though African countries on the surface may have received independence, but just like some of the videos we heard just a moment ago were saying, that actually there's a lot of external forces that are still pushing pressure to this day on these independent African countries. So this is not a thing of the past. This is a thing of the past and the present. And I think I'd just like to wrap it up with one last quote, if you don't mind, which is not on the slides. And I'm just going to read it out. And it's an article I came across by Dr. 𝗞𝗰𝗿. He's a PhD and the general coordinator of an organization in Africa which deals with food sovereignty. And I'm just going to read the following quote from him, and he says, "I see the knee on George Floyd's neck as also being symbolic of how neo-colonialism is putting their knee on the neck of Africa. I hear Africa saying, 'I can't breathe.' It is the same knee that justified colonialism in Africa. It is the same knee that sees Africa not for what it has, but for what it is lacking. Those who are putting their knee on our neck look at us as stupid, uncivilized, barbaric, clueless, disease-ridden, and to be controlled and directed by the all-knowing and powerful human race. We cannot breathe in Africa as spaces in the continent are crowded by outside actors and their inside collaborators. They create a powerful narrative. They design our policies to suit their needs. They influence our legislation. They formulate our educational systems so that the products of their systems serve their purpose. And they denigrate our culture so that we lose ours and become subservient to their culture. They do not have to put their knees physically on us because their culture and ideas are already inherited." And that's a powerful statement to make, but as you probably can hear in that statement, that he's suggesting that these legacies of colonialism may have changed in some form, but there are still attachments there that the global north still applying pressure in economic ways, in trade, and in other ways that actually still cause significant negative externalities to the continent of Africa. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Neil. That's really helpful. Some really stark statistics there. We kind of often think there's a lot of aid going into Africa, don't we? Thinking there's always a lot of money going in, but my goodness, there's so much coming out. It kind of seems to dwarf what's going in right now. Okay, we're going to get into our breakout rooms fairly soon. Just want to remind us of the kind of ground rules or 10 qualities of the spaces we're trying to create here, that we commit to be respectful and non-judgmental as we share with each other. We're at different stages of learning, willing to own our own ignorance towards learning. Careful and considerate, thinking before we speak. Personal, able to speak our own truths and for others to be able to hear that. And emotions are fine. Emotions are okay. In fact, they're needed at times. Not to rationalize away each other's feelings or experiences. To be sensitive to each other's needs, building relationships and different levels of sharing. For those of us who are white, not wallowing in white guilt, but guilt as a prompt to action was important. Accepting of each other if we stumble. Confidential to the space in which something is shared. So when we ask for a summary of the conversation, we don't want individual people to share what anyone else has shared, but to only to share what you've shared in a personal way. And then finally, courageous, open to challenge and to being challenged. Okay, so we're going to get into our breakout rooms now for 20 minutes. James is going to cover that for us, but these are the questions that we suggest that you use for as prompts for your discussion. I will post these into chat once you're in your breakout rooms. So what was new for you, if anything, today? Were you surprised or shocked by anything you heard or saw in those videos? What insights do you think the Scramble for Africa brings to the nature today of the UK's relationship? I recognize there might be people here from across the globe and across the sea. I guess we're focusing largely on the UK's relationship tonight with African countries and how Africa views the UK and other colonial powers. And then finally, the kind of application question for us as aspiring white allies. What difference should this make to us as we seek to be better allies against racism? The recording continues with the feedback from the breakout groups. Yeah, so a variety of different things we touched on. I had some very knowledgeable people in my group that knew probably most of the facts and figures already. We just reflected on some of the stark facts and figures that were shared in those last slides by Neil, and the proportion of money going out of Africa when it needs to stay or go into Africa as a net result. So that's enough from me. Who else would like to share from the groups? Neil, can I pounce on you to share?
Yeah. There was a fair amount of shock expressed at how much into the modern era the European countries are still draining, and the debts that are owed to them and the companies that are owned by them and the influences they have in. I think there was a fair amount of shock at how much, the extent of it really. And I likened it to Latin America and the US, fairly similar sort of principles involved. And I also remembered that the French made Haiti pay for 175 years for their independence, which is I only found out 6 months ago. So a comment by one person was, by accident of birth, we're here. And I think that was, I really felt that was profound and absolutely right, really. Just look at our lives compared to someone who's been born in sub-Saharan Africa in a country with, perhaps even without resources. I just thought that was interesting reflection. And then we moved on to how Africans have been dehumanized by white people, and that goes back to slave stuff and beyond. And the sheer what it feels for white British people to want to empathize and find ways of persuading other white people to do something about the legacies that have come about. And then there is frustration about what could be done, because it's difficult to know. There was, I pointed out some of the complexities involved with the CRED report saying, back a year ago, apparently we haven't got any racism in Britain anymore. It's only about, people who shouldn't be taking drugs at school. You know what I mean? And then that led into, there's a fair amount of people from ethnic minority backgrounds in the government, but it's more about money than it is about what colour their skin is. So complex things. But in the end, it's about, well, how can you keep going and what can you do? And, racial justice groups at church, for example, came up. And, I was mentioning the Bristol, the Colston Fort, and kind of people who are brave enough to really go for it. And they were prepared to go to prison, those people. And I think anyway, that's pretty much what we discussed.
Great, thank you, Neil. Daniel, were you covering a group as well?
I can, but does anyone else from our group want to share? I'm happy to say something, but if anyone else wants to share, then go ahead. Do you want to say anything, Alison? Or shall I?
I'd say you go first anyway.
Okay. The first, I think our first, our kind of group reaction was shock, but not surprise. And I think we mentioned, as I think other groups have, just the fact that it really is still, a lot of it still ongoing. It's not, it's not the past, the debts owed and what have you are not things. I think we touched in previous sessions on some debts that the UK only just finished sort of calling in a few years ago, but these are actually ongoing things. And we talked about why is that? How is it even possible when they seem so obviously just wrong? So we talked a bit about education, about where we get our news from, about how even if you read different newspapers or watch different TV channels, they're all still essentially Western and they're all pretty white. Whether it's possible to sort of really to get another perspective. And we sort of perhaps took a little bit of a diversion there and started talking about Ukraine and where our info comes from and that, what have you. Yes, what else? Help me now, Alison.
Well, the need for a change of narrative we hear about the rich West, the developed countries helping the developing countries, not exploiting them, no, nothing like that, but we're always helping them and they need us. And I think that it clearly is puts the truth on its head, and we need to get the true story out there. And the Sustainable Development Goals that all the UN member states, rich, poor, and in the middle, have agreed to. I think they're the right plan, and I hope if we stop, if we start seeing things in a fairer perspective, we will get behind that plan and see an end to poverty, and not be exploiting the country in a way that if we weren't, we could solve the poverty problem 15 times over.
Thank you, Alison. I'm very conscious of the time, and I do want to keep to commitments. So do stay on if you can, but I'm just going to round things off for those that need to go. Just want to share the rest of this year's program. Windrush Day, we're going to look at the Windrush scandal, what next in the fight for justice. We are going very practical towards the end of the year in October, looking at how we can make a difference, the art of persuasion. Daniel and Claire are going to help with that. I'm still aiming to set up a teachers network. If we've got any volunteers to help me with that, would be great, because there are a number of teachers in our network, so that would be really good too. Just to refer to something that was mentioned in the last video, the Malawian boy that managed to invent power for his village. Great Netflix film on that called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. If you haven't seen that already, really lovely film. Just a book that's just arrived today. I don't know if you can see this or not. Well, what people can do next. I haven't read it yet, but it talks about from allyship to coalition. I was kind of wondering whether we could add coalition to our name, but White Allies Network Coalition. The acronym doesn't actually work very well. But anyway, sorry about that. Just a reminder too, we've got loads of resources, hundreds of resources on our website, so do access those if you possibly can. So yeah, and if you're not yet a member, do sign up. And the next date for your diary, as I said, is the 22nd of June. I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to stop recording to allow anyone who needs to go, but do hang around if you can.